Slight technical problems again. They can visit us from time to time. My name is Aharon Solomons. I'm an ADA instructor trainer, and we train people for competitions, records, and also we do all the ranks of ADA courses up from beginner to instructor. I also do something else called remote coaching. You'll find this on our website at www.freedivers.net, and that's very, very individual. It's something that we talk about and discuss together. It can be anything from a specific problem to somebody really wanting a training regime to improve in a period where he has no access to the sea. Right, well, tonight we're answering a single question. It concerns mental training. This is a very big subject, so it's going to take some time to answer the thing. Now, mental training. First of all, freediving is perhaps one of the most mental sports. That's to say that the mental plays a huge part in performance. In freediving, a lot of our freedivers are what you might consider superannuated for the normal athlete. They're above the age of the average Olympic athlete for being at the top of their particular profession, chosen sport. Years ago, we had up on our website a saying that said we've long since passed the limits of our purely physiological potential and are now into the terra incognita of our mental potential. A little bit pompous, but it's pretty true that this is the way, or one of the ways forward. It's a part of a freediver's training that should be stressed right from the beginning and very often isn't. There is a relationship, which I'll go into later on, between the mental, the psychological, and the physical. In freediving, unlike some athletic sports, your body is not a slave that is beaten into submission to produce the best results. It's a kind of consensus between all the three major factors here: the mental, the psychological, and the physical. Now, first of all, we've got to understand that for progress, we need stress. Now, stress doesn't make progress. Stress is a kind of stimulation. And we say that we need stress in order to produce progress, but stress doesn't make progress. What makes progress is your adaptation to a certain level of stress. If the stress is too great, we hit a wall, or we get total collapse. We start going backwards. This is quite a common phenomenon in freediving. So we have to understand the middle line. What is a sufficient amount of stress? If you don't have enough stress, then your body behaves a bit like a donkey that you have to kick and get it to go. It becomes lazy. So we need the right amount of stress. Right, well, stress and stimulation and everything is all very well, but let's deal with the mental from the beginning. If you can recall your first freediving course or your first serious attempts at freediving, you'll find all kinds of advice that you were given. And all sorts of commands that you were given to memorize. You were told, relax and breathe on the line, in a way that you'd been taught. You were told, number one, before you go down, take a big breath. Number two, take the snorkel out of your mouth. 3, equalize. 4, do your duck dive and begin your descent. Now, these were all things that you had to memorize. The first challenge of mental training is to be able to memorize commands that you give yourself before the dive and actually execute them during the dive. Now, here you have to sort out priorities. The next thing you're probably going to be told is don't look down the line. That's a hell of a challenge for somebody, because from the time that we're sort of a meter tall or less, we're told, hey, look where you're going. If you don't, you're going to bump your head on the table, you're going to fall over the dog, all sorts of other stuff like this. So here we're telling somebody to do something that is actually totally unnatural. Don't look down the line. It has all kinds of bad repercussions. This is the beginning of mental training. Now actually what happens is this. As we get more proficient, a lot of these initial things get shifted to the subconscious. I don't know whether you remember when you began to learn how to drive. Maybe the first time you sat in the car by yourself without your instructor, you suddenly went into a dialogue of your own. Now, what shall I do? Before I turn on the ignition, maybe it's a good idea to check the mirrors. Yeah, that's right. Now, wait a minute, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to put on a seat belt. No, I better check to see whether the car's in gear and the handbrake is on. Right. Now, what I do is I turn on the ignition, depress the clutch, put it in first gear, indicate that I'm moving out into the traffic, check the mirror again, lift my foot gently from the clutch and give a little bit of gas, and then ease out into the traffic. And I go on with a dialogue all the time I'm driving, telling myself what to do. I have to do this because these gestures are not automatic. They haven't been shifted to the subconscious. Funny thing, after a month, I get to the office and suddenly I realize, hey, I don't remember a thing about driving all the way here. Not only all the mechanical handling of the car, but the handling of road situations, everything else, it was passed to automatic pilot. As a matter of fact, my mind was occupied with that argument I had with my girlfriend just before I left the house and what I should have said to her, because you know, one always remembers the things one should have said too late. Anyway, my mind was completely occupied with something else and everything worked perfectly. Here's the ticket. Your subconscious is an enormous friend. It is very, very precise. It does things incredibly well if you trust it. So we try and shift in freediving as much tasks as we can onto this wonderful machine that will look after them, provided we don't interfere with it. It has two opponents. One is will, and the other is ego. So if we can remove those from the picture and let it do its job, it does it remarkably well. Very often, at a much more advanced stage, we find that we had a superb dive where we weren't thinking when to do the cheek fill, when we weren't thinking about this, that, and the other. It just happened. And this is what we're looking for here. No, so to recap, the main thing is to try and shift things onto automatic pilot. And it'll handle an enormous amount of tasks, provided we repeat them and allow the subconscious time to absorb them. What are we really talking about here? We're taking a blind guess here because I'm not a physiologist, but in looking at what's happening in the brain, probably this information in the subconscious is coming from your medulla oblongata and pons. And probably the things that are shifting it to there are coming from the infralimbic areas, the prefrontal cortex of the brain, particularly the orbitomedial prefrontal cortex and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. If anybody is a physiologist, he'd probably look at Brodmann areas 25 and 40 and their relationship to the medulla and the pons. Okay. Something we studied or looked at when we were doing experiments in Oxford many years ago. And it was incredibly interesting, this little dance between those various areas. Your PFC, which used to be considered silent areas of the brain, is where your neocortex sort of turns under itself. And these were called silent areas because they were very difficult to investigate what was happening there without being invasive, which of course disrupt their functions. Today we have a much better idea of how to investigate them. So, one of the main things here is, as I say, trust. Now, another thing is, here's the opposite to trust, where the will comes in. You're in a competition, you say to yourself, you've got a target depth, I must get to so-and-so, I must get to 60 meters. There's a problem there. You're nearly guaranteed not to get there, because your focus is going to be on the depth and not on the steps or the things that you've got to do on the way. And it's actually interfering with your subconscious doing something about it. So thinking about the end result is non-productive. And we try to avoid that at all costs. The kind of attitude that we want is we're committed, yeah, but we're not attached to the results. We're committed to the dive, but we're not attached to the results. If we have a Buddhist in our midst, he might say non-attachment, non-aversion. Very good idea. If we don't do this, we can have pretty catastrophic results. Perseverance is one of the main factors in doing it. So we have to be committed to the dive, but as I say, not attached to the results. Now, we'll talk about different types of focus that we have. I don't know whether any of you have ever done any competition shooting. If you have, you'll know that your sight picture, where you get a clear picture of your sights and the target, is probably for less than 2 seconds. It's rather like if you stare at something, a particular object, maybe 1.5 meters away from you, and it's crystal clear, but if you go on staring at it without blinking, what happens is that the picture sort of dissolves. And you go into a kind of general peripheral vision, holistic picture of the area. This actually sets up nearly exactly what you want before a dive. It means that you're in the area of the subconscious. From here, Hey boss, we're in with you, we're working with you, you take over. That's your automatic pilot. It can be done visually. There are different ways into it and different techniques into it, and that's a whole subject in itself. Now, other aspects of these things. There are things that we try at all costs to avoid. I'll come to those eventually. One of the factors that we have to have two factors before we even begin. One is confidence, and the other is relaxation. Confidence usually comes from your training, from knowing that you've covered every single aspect of the dive. You've covered questions of style, you've covered questions of relaxation and breathing. You've covered all the various facets of equalization and the mouthfeel. You've covered the tactics of the glide. You've decided whether you want a 3-part descent or a 2-part descent. You've covered all those factors, they're all in place, you've practiced them and you know them. And obviously, the thing that's very important at the end, your surface protocol. So all these things have been practiced, they're learned behaviors by now, you've done it enough, you've had enough exposure to depth for the body to adapt, you're flexible enough. All these things are in place, and therefore you can have confidence in your training. And at that point, it becomes a question of belief. You have to believe yourself. I've known freedivers who had horrendous experiences in competition because they didn't believe themselves. They were really well prepared. And I remember it in the very early days of competition, when the numbers were much lower. I remember a diver who was sort of, in those days, middle rank, today he'd be a beginner, had declared 47 meters in competition. And he had to prove himself because it had been 5 days since he'd done that depth. So he decided he had to do 46 meters in a warm-up, and then wondered why he blacked out in his dive immediately after it. This is a question of belief. Very often the things that we have to do, particularly in looking for the higher numbers, we have to program into our training sufficient rest. We have to believe what we should believe, that rest is an essential part of the training. That's when you grow. When you actually train, you're only giving a stimulation for the growth that happens during the rest period. And if you think of the rest period as time wasted from training and all the rest of it, what's going to happen is you're going to overtrain. And if you overtrain, you're going to hit the wall and you're going to start going backwards. So again, not only prove to yourself something once, but then believe in it. It's a critical part of the whole process. There's another thing, an old axiom, that success breeds success. So it's also part of your mental training here, because look, you can have a dive that doesn't achieve its objectives, but it's still successful, and you have to realize that because you've learned something very important from it. Sometimes we learn a lot more from the dive where we didn't achieve the objectives than a dive where we did. So you have to switch gears and think of that as success as well. That's also a critical part of the process. Then there are things to avoid. One of the classics to avoid is the spoilt diver. The spoilt diver needs, oh, a little bit more time to prepare. Oh, I'm not ready. I need a bit more air. I need a bit more time to prepare. This is the spoilt diver. The French are actually excellent in their preparation in this, because they bug each other horribly during preparation to make sure that they click back in seconds. You should never say to yourself, right, I've been to 70 meters today and tomorrow I'm doing more, and therefore I need more air, I need another few breaths, I need a little bit more time. No. Your preparation should be the same for any depth that you're doing. And it should be completely logical for that and consistent. And you don't budge from that. This is a very, very important point. And it's also important not to allow yourself to be distracted. I remember with a degree of comedy that in 2008 the international competition in Sharm el-Sheikh happened at the time of Ramadan, and I remember the prayer call happening frequently during the countdown from loudspeakers on the minaret of the mosque that overlooked the pool. This was, what was comic was the clash between two things here. I'm not saying that the call to prayer was comic, it wasn't in the least. But maybe the meeting of that and the countdown was exceptionally comic and quite difficult to deal with for some people. It was a situation that there was no solution for. The two events coincided at the same time. Fair enough. You have to be able to deal with it. And the only way you can deal with it is to accept interference of all kinds during the time that you're breathing up. The person that requires absolute calm, absolute quiet, and absolute perfect conditions, forget it. Largely in competition, you've got to be ready for anything. And you've got to train yourself to be mentally ready for it. If you're not, you're the spoiled diver. And they usually, at some stage or other, pay the price for it. Now, the other thing is being in the zone, clicking in and out of it. You know, you're in the zone, you get an interruption, you are interrupted, okay, but immediately click back in without resentment or without anything else. I'm just going back into it, that's it. And nothing is going to interfere with it. And this is what we want, and this is what we've got to train for. Another thing that we have to take into account is this. We talked a little bit about overtraining and its effects. Overtraining is both physical, emotional, and mental. If you go too many times to the well and too many times pushing your maximum, you're pushing your own psychology, and eventually the psychology gets tired and says, hey, I don't want to do that. That's too uncomfortable. It's too painful. I really don't want to do that. And as opposed to looking forward with something with pleasure, which is what it should be, shouldn't it? It should be pleasure. You kind of begin to dread it. There is a quota that we all have of courage. And here's the thing. If we draw on it too much at a time, we lose enjoyment. And if we lose enjoyment, then what happens? The results begin to deteriorate. We are flogging the poor donkey and getting him to do the job by force. Not a good recommendation. The beautiful example of the unspoiled diver is a Greek sponge diver from the year 1913 called Hagistati, the gent who rescued the anchor of the Santa Margarita. Here you had your Greek sponge divers with the Scandalapetra. The Scandalapetra looked something like this. It was a stone that shape, and you held it like that above your head and you went down following the stone. And they were dressed in nothing, yeah? No suit, no nose clip, nothing. No fins, of course. And they were working at depths between 70 and 100 meters. And they were collecting sponges. Here we have a very nice example from Kalymnos. Anybody want to buy this? This also is actually a little souvenir from Kalymnos. If Nicholas Triklis happens to come across this webinar, my homage to him. It's a wonderful old discipline, and these people were the absolute epitome of the unspoiled diver. Their living depended on it. I kind of know those better, but one can put the Ama in the same category. We can put a lot of the divers from the Philippines in the same category. The Ama from both Korea and Japan, of course. A lot of the working divers who worked as free divers, and they were definitely unspoiled divers. So that's one of the main things in this situation, not to be the spoilt diver. Now, another thing that's going to help you and reinforce your attempts at all your effort at the mental and the psychological is organization. Get it together. Get your equipment organized. Sort out your priorities at the beginning of the season. I want to join a competition. Which competition should I join? Okay, finance, I know, plays a major part in this. Which one can I afford to? When can I afford to take off work? How should I plan my training with this particular objective in mind? All those things, but get it organized. Don't let things surprise you. Another thing that this leads into about organization is during the time of a competition, don't change things. Keep to your habits. Now here's the thing, because the next thing that I'm going to say to you is don't have little rituals or favorite pieces of equipment or little woolly dogs that have to go down with you or something else. A very, very good example of somebody who was not attached to their particular equipment, I remember in a competition that took place in Ibiza in 2001. I was in the Israeli team. Maria Teresa and myself were due to dive at the same time, and immediately behind us, all the Israeli team declared the same depth, something that you could wake us up in the middle of the night and say, hey, do it, and we could absolutely guarantee that we would do it. And we did it. But just as we were getting ready for the competition, let's say we were getting off the boat that took us out to the platform, the next person behind us to dive was a very good friend called Evgeny Butov. And as we all disembarked onto the raft to be ready straight away to get into the warm-up zone, Evgeny slipped and smashed his monofin. Now, he was going to be seconds behind us. So I said, look, Evgeny, you and I have the same size feet, use mine. I'll get Erez, who was our captain, to pass it to you while you're on the warm-up line. So you're going to have to do your warm-up as plain free immersion pull downs. So he agreed to that, and he did it absolutely perfectly. Now there's a guy who was not attached to it, didn't get thrown off by a incident that was pure bad luck, and didn't see that as doom and the whole day and dive doomed or anything else. He accepted the fact that there was an accident, he accepted the tasks that had to be done and did them. That's good training. Okay? And my hat off to him. There are other things that I would advise during a competition. Don't, before you go, create any unnecessary expectations, either in yourself or in other people. You're going to have a go to do something. That's it. They don't have to know anything any more about it than that. And the less they know, frankly, the better. Do not get involved in conversations on the thing. I've known a lot of people come apart with that one. Somebody slips in a little remark that creates the wrong resonance, and hey, their mind goes into negativity, which can be nearly bottomless. Don't do it. A little chance remark before an event can wipe you out. So actually, at this stage, treat the rest of the human race as lepers and better keep away from them for the moment. You can reserve your socializing and your smooching till after the event. And so, in other words, less talk, the better. So, going back again, no rituals, no mental crutches, no little googahs that if they get lost or mislaid or aren't there are going to throw you off. You are your own product. You deal with what comes and without any particular problems. Never compare yourself to other people. Doesn't matter. Freedive competition is something that should be recommended to people right from the beginning. People who want to be competitive freedivers should actually go to a competition as soon as they possibly can. It learns. Sorry, I've got to.
Even if they do 20, 30 meters.
Even if they're doing 20 or 30 meters, thank you, it doesn't matter. Go to the competition to learn what it feels like. You'll get a terrific amount of information from other people, and also you'll learn what it feels like to compete, and at a time when the expectations are not great, not yours and not other people's expectations of you. If you wait until you're way up in the high numbers for your first competition, and you make a declaration of, 90 meters or something like that, then there's an awful lot of stress on you. If that's your first competition, I mean, that's incredible. I'm exaggerating on purpose. So if that's your direction, my advice is to you to get involved in a competition as soon as you possibly can. And have fun. Enjoy it. Enjoy socializing with other people. Enjoy rubbing shoulders with the greats of the sport. You'll pick up a lot of information. A lot of them are very generous people who are kind to other people and not sparing of their advice and help. So it's a very good exposure to do that right at the beginning. So what we're talking about in the end is that, here's the thing, the dance between the mental and the psychological. The mental, the fact that at the beginning you tell yourself things to do, like at the beginning when you're driving, etc., is very, very helpful. Because what it's doing is, it's showing the psychological that I'm in control, I'm in command. And then it's possible to make the transition from the mental to the psychological, where the psychological or the subconscious takes over, and you, by that time, have faith in it, you believe in it, and believe in its wonderful precision. So that what happens is, you perform in a state of effortless detachment. The gent behind me is David King from England, who's with us for some... David Kent, sorry, I beg your pardon. Whoa! Been living with us for a bit. Sorry about that. Sorry, David. Wave. That's David. He's training with us at the moment and doing great things, in spite of changing his name. And so the last thing that I'm going to tell you is that, above all, enjoy it. Find pleasure in what you're doing. If the pleasure goes out of it, you're doing something wrong. Okay, now I'm just going to do a brief check for questions.
No.
We've got about 15 minutes left.
We don't have questions, but we have 9 people with us. Mateos is with us.
Right.
So
We
you can
have
say hello and thank you then.
we have quite a lot of people with us, including Mateos and a lot of other people. Please, if there's a question that you have or something that you'd like me to yap about, I'm with you. I'll give 5 seconds for anything to come up. I know some of you can write, even if you've only got an index finger to do it with. I manage to type occasionally with one finger. I've sort of crawled out of the cave, the Jurassic period, and learned how to operate one of these machines up to a point. So I'm going to give a 5-second pause to see if anything comes in. Well, a bit more than that, 10-second pause to see if anything comes in. And if not, we'll have a little chat about what we're doing next week.
In the meantime, I would like you to ask people that watch the webinar not online to let us know that they did and write what they think and maybe ask questions for next week.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That was a contribution from Alina. I don't know whether you heard that. I understand that more people are watching this as a recorded version than actually attending. That's healthy. We tried to do the... we tried to organize the time in a way that we thought would catch the most speakers, the most people in Europe. It would be the most convenient for people in Europe. There will be people in all kinds of the world, I've been told, even in the United States of America and places, where the time differences, of course, can be anything from 6 to 9 hours or even 10 hours. So, of course, they'll be watching recordings. If they have comments, I'd love to hear them. And if they have questions, I'd also love to hear those. I know we have a pretty regular attender from the Azores, which I understand is somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Nobody's quite found it, I think, since Drake. There are some weird spear fishermen who hang out there, and lovely people. They also ask questions from time to time. some of them, I mean, are even relevant to freediving. So please, if you have any comments about anything, including the organisation thing, I know we were late tonight. We do have mechanical problems from time to time. But that's it. So I'm just going to take a break of a minute and see if there are any more questions or any more comments. If there aren't, I'm going to wrap it up for tonight. Next week's webinar the subjects we will publish, and they will be based on past questions. Yeah, we have got a little bit of a backlog there, but that's it. I'm going to take a break for a second and enjoy some tea.
Maybe you should ask David Kent, not King, how much he enjoys the freediving. David is shy.
David shy, okay. That's fair enough. David's wrestling something called the cork at the moment. He has rather a thick wetsuit. And David has a wonderful talent, for tearing up wetsuits that we've discovered. He is converting this place into a neoprene repair studio. After every dive. It's fun. We did manage to get over the message that perhaps a little soap might
help in wearing it.
Enable a wetsuit to go on a little bit better.
That's our favorite friend these days.
Yeah, that's the friend and the pastime these days. It's neoprene cement.
And that's some leftovers.
And that's I think that was that David's suit from yesterday. But we're having a lot of fun with that anyway. So there doesn't appear to be anything particular come up. Let's have a check.
Yeah.
Right.
You can show your new sexy glasses.
No, that's it. Okay. So thank you all for attending tonight, and we'll catch you in 2 weeks' time, which is on. When does 2 weeks work out to be? Hang on. Today being the 24th.
8th.
On the 8th.
The Jerusalem Day.
Okay, so we'll be on the 8th, we'll be meeting again. That's the 8th of May. So I suppose I can wish you a good May Day in the meantime. And as I say, thank you very much for attending. And all the best for Melat. Bye.